Okay, so let's start this session. And I hope everybody, and first, thank you all for joining us again. And I hope you have had a very good break time. Well, joining me here now in this session are three great scholars. I would like to introduce our guests and the topic of today. Well, our guests are going to talk about the open science initiatives, the Postprint pledge, and this session is going to be run by Dr. Ali Al-Hoorie from Saudi TESOL Association, Professor Phil Hiver from College of Education, Florida State University, and Professor Brian Nosek from Center for Open Science and University of Virginia. Thank you all for joining us here. Now let's hand it over to Dr. Al-Hoorie. Hello, Doctor.
Hello, thank you very much for this introduction. Before I start, I would like to say that this morning we heard the sad news that Professor Zoltan Dornier has passed away, and he was my supervisor and a friend and a mentor. So we dedicate this page, which we are launching today, to his memory. So outline. So I'm going to first start talking about another previous initiative called the Cost of Knowledge. Then I will mention the Postprint pledge, and then we'll see where we go forward. So, Cost of Knowledge. The Cost of Knowledge is an initiative started by someone, mathematician called Timothy Growers in 2012, and the major purpose of this initiative was boycotting Elsevier. There were reasons for it, like high subscription fees for journals, bundling subscriptions, and support for anti-open access acts, especially in the United States. And this initiative garnered a lot of support, and it had over 20,000 signatories. And as you can see here, this is a screenshot of that initiative. When you sign up, you can choose whether you want to refrain from publishing with Elsevier, refereeing for Elsevier, or doing editorial work, or all of them. So how did this initiative go? So a few years ago, there was a study evaluating this initiative, and they went back and saw the people who signed up to see whether they adhered to the pledge they made or not. The results showed that 21% were unidentifiable signatories, 19 had not published at all, 23% did publish in Elsevier, although the whole point of signing up was not to publish in Elsevier, and only 37% published in other venues other than Elsevier. So this wasn't very promising, if only just 1/3. So something, happened that didn't make people adhere to the pledge. So as the author said, indeed, relatively few researchers have signed the petition in recent years, thus giving the impression that the boycott has run its course. So why did this happen? Why wasn't the impact stronger? Maybe because that initiative was confrontational, boycotting an influential publisher, which could harm especially early career researchers. Somebody trying to sign up and thinking, what if I need to publish a paper 5 years from now in an Elsevier journal, as opposed to more established researchers? There wasn't a sense of community. You just sign up and leave. It was for all fields, so there was no accountability. It was targeting only one publisher. So in terms of open science, is this going to fix open science? And notably, citing Elsevier was not mentioned, even though I think if you just mention citing Elsevier and forget about everything else, that would probably have a higher impact, especially if the reason you are signing up is that you think what Elsevier is doing is unethical. So for applied linguistics, especially, there is now increasing interest in open science. So we decided to do this initiative, the Postprint. But first, what is a postprint? This is a very critical point. the postprint is not the preprint. The P in preprint means it has not been peer-reviewed. The postprint is the accepted version of your manuscript after it has passed peer-reviewed. So for preprints, many people may hesitate to share preprints for many reasons. Some people might believe that if they share preprints, their work might be scooped. Some people might be hesitant to share preprints because they think that during the review process, some mistakes might come up and, let me wait. But postprint is the accepted version of the paper. As an illustration, this is an example. So this is the version of record. When you read the paper, you read it in this format or something like it. This is the accepted version. So it has the title here, it has the author's name, it has the affiliation. The current manuscript is the postprint of a paper accepted for publication, and then you mention the journal and the DOI so that people can cite your paper. But this is not the preprint, this is the accepted version. If you want to share the preprint, that's also up to you, but we are not talking about preprints here. So in fact, pretty much all publishers require you that you mention this information when you post your postprint. And even if they don't require you, you should put this information so that people can cite you when they read this this paper. Otherwise, they may not know how to cite this paper. So is posting preprints legal? So it depends on each publisher's policies. So we looked at 60 applied linguistics and second language acquisition papers from Web of Science. We looked at Sherpa Romeo to look at their policies, and here are the results. These are the publishers that permit you to share postprint: Cambridge, Elsevier, John Benjamin Sage, etc., etc. These are okay with postprint. Some publishers allow you to post postprints on personal websites only, and then they have an embargo, usually 1 year, for repositories. This includes Springer, Oxford University Press, and Taylor and Francis. Finally, the publisher that does not encourage postprints before an embargo period, usually 24 months, which is kind of too long, is Wiley. Surprisingly, before we started this study, we thought that Elsevier would be the worst offender here, but actually for applied linguistics, at least, Wiley is the least progressive publisher when it comes to postprint. Interesting fact. So what is this page is about? This is does not ask anybody to break any laws, because we will see in the next slide, it's most publishers allow people to share postprint. It's asking you to share postprints, not preprints. Again, if you want to share preprints, that's up to you. We are not talking about preprints here. It does not limit you to the 60 journals that, again, the next slide, we will see some of them. And does not require you to boycott any publishers or anything like the cost of knowledge that, the other initiative. So this is a short screenshot of the table. You can see the journal title here, the publisher, and then does it allow you to post the postprint on your personal website? All of them say yes. If you scroll down that page, you see some of them have an embargo period. On repositories, again, all these publishers say yes. Again, if you scroll down, you'll see some publishers having an embargo period before you are allowed to. Then if you want to check for yourself, you can go to this link for each journal to see specifically the instructions and guidelines. So what do you do? In this initiative, we are asking applied linguists to share the postprint of their accepted manuscripts online in line with the publisher's copyright. So we're not asking anybody to violate any copyright. You should include the publication details, as we saw, where you published this, the authors, the affiliations, the DOI when it's ready, so that people can cite you. You may have a citation advantage also, because if people can't read your paper, then they will be unlikely to cite it. You can choose a repository. There are several repositories, including OSF and some other archives that, some of them are for linguistics, some of them are for education. All these are free. You go and create an account, post it, in some information, your name, where it was published, etc., etc. In less than 5 minutes, it will be online. After you post your postprint, you are welcome to come to Applied Linguistics Research Methods discussion Facebook group and share your postprint for more publicity for your work. And I would like to thank Luke Blonsky for giving us the chance for hosting this hashtag on this group. So we don't have Twitter here because applied linguistics doesn't seem to be a Twitter field. Very few linguists are on Twitter, unlike, for example, psychology. But as you can see here, the number of members in this group is, a lot. Also, I would like to thank the people who supported this initiative, who had the time to read and respond and give us feedback on it, and agreeing to list their names as supporters so that other people can join this initiative. So this is the website of this initiative. If you scan the QR code here, it will take you directly. You can read it, sign your name, and start doing it. The link is here. I'm not sure if you can see the link, but Phil can probably post the link in the chat box. Finally, again, I would like to thank Luke Blonsky for hosting this on his Facebook group, as well as Cooper and Mohammed for technical support while setting up this campaign. Finally, please normalize postprints. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Hoorie, and I'm very sorry for your loss. It was great. Thank you. Now, Brian. Okay.
Great. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here to talk about issues in promoting open science in the applied linguistics community. What I'd like to do in complementing Ali's presentation about a particular initiative of promoting postprints is to talk about the broader challenge of how is it that we can motivate change in open science within our communities, and what are the factors that might accelerate that adoption and keep it aligned with the values that we have for why we are doing research in the first place. So one of the key things that is important, I think, to recognize in the challenge and opportunity for motivating change, culture change toward a more open science, is to recognize that many of the advocates have different kinds of motivations that bring them to promoting open science practices. And those motivations are differently relevant for some of the different behaviors and initiatives that are promoting change. So for example, the Postprint pledge has a strong emphasis on democratizing access to knowledge. Who gets to participate? How do they get to participate? Who can access knowledge, not necessarily behind paywalls? There's also a lot of interest among open science advocates for improving inclusion in research. Who gets to be involved in the research process, and how might we broaden collaboration and include more people at different ways of which they get involved in the research process. There's also motivations for how we can make a more equitable distribution of the resources that promote and advance research. There's so much exclusivity in resources going to the already rich institutions, rich research laboratories or environments. And if we promote more equitable distribution, we may be able to accelerate and expand progress by providing resources to more groups to do more things more effectively. There's another class of motivations for open science that's really about improving transparency and sharing of research outputs so that we can both understand better how the research was done, but also promote reuse and extension of research more effectively. And greater transparency may also have roots in motivations for trying to improve accountability for research practice. If I know that you can see my data and my process more than just the report that I write, I may change my practice in ways that is more reflective about how would you as a reader respond to the various decisions that I make in the research process, the things that I decide to leave out, et cetera. And that's linked to the third area of common motivations for open science, which is really trying to figure out how can we do the research process better? How can we use more effective transparency and sharing of the research outputs to make it possible to do what we idealize science to be effective at doing, which is self-correct. We know we're going to be wrong a lot. We're going to offer ideas and interpretations and theoretical models that have significant limitations and are not necessarily aligned with the evidence that we produce. And so an important part of the research process is to be able to identify error, reduce uncertainty, and promote more effective models of how we understand the phenomena that we study. So open science can be a factor in helping to do that rather than having us depend on our best interpretation of what we think you did. We can actually get more into what we are each doing and building more effectively on the methods and data that we are producing. And that, of course, is linked to the overall promotion of rigor and reproducibility in science. So these different motivations are not mutually exclusive. One may have all of those motivations and what they would like to see change in open science. But recognizing that some people and some initiatives may emphasize one or more of these to a different extent can help to facilitate better collaboration across the advocates for open science so that we are representing and aligning the various motivations that people have with the initiatives that we promote. And that has relevance for thinking about how do we advance a behavior change or a culture change strategy to be as effective as possible. A lot of what Ali described in the Postprint pledge is thinking about here is an initiative that didn't quite work as effectively as we might have hoped, the Cost of Knowledge project. How might we translate this into one that is more effectively aligned with researchers' own interests and something that can more easily be adopted and spread across the applied linguistics community? So what you see in the pyramid and the text to the right is the theory of change that the Center for Open Science uses in how we think about developing initiatives and trying to implement them for sustainable behavior change. At the core is providing infrastructure to make it possible to do the behaviors. Okay, we want to share papers more openly. Where can I do it? How do I do it? And if we can most effectively link those infrastructures to how researchers do their practice on a daily basis, provide training for how to implement that easily. As Ali mentioned, it takes 5 minutes to post one's paper at one of those services. That's easy. We all have 5 minutes somewhere in our day where we could do that behavior. And the process for doing it is relatively straightforward. There isn't a big training exercise that you need for 2 hours to figure it out. The whole purpose of this kind of event is to increase visibility of open science behaviors, form community around that interest. The Facebook page of announcing and making visible when you post a postprint will then help others in the field say, oh, maybe this is a thing that we do now. Oh, this is something that we are now aligned on in order to advance the transparency. And one of the motivations of the Postprint pledge of open science more generally, we're increasing access of our work to people who are in communities that don't have subscriptions to all of these journals. And longer term, to the extent that we can make it rewarding for open science practices, it's not just something I'm doing because it's out of the goodness of my heart, but in fact, it's aligned with my career interests. By making my papers more available, more accessible to people without the subscriptions, you're more likely to read it, you may be then more likely to cite it. You may be more likely to build on it. So it's in my active interest to post these papers so that others can read them. And then, of course, in some contexts, it's appropriate to think about how the policies may actually require these behaviors once we're trying to get to full adoption. Right? And that's really in the case of open access, is in the context of national governments saying, we're paying for a lot of this research. We want the public to have access to it. And so there's a number of countries that are now moving towards requirements for open access of different types of research outputs. So that is a change model, but there are different points of emphasis, different motivations that bring people along in adopting open practices from the outset of a new behavior to the full adoption by the community. And the turned on its side distribution may be familiar to many of you. This is the classic Rogers diffusion of innovation model, the idea of how is it that new behaviors or new technologies get adopted and spread in a community. And we think about this in relation to the theory of change model, where those innovators, people who are motivated by the behavior itself, who see the vision of what it would mean to share our papers more openly, just providing infrastructure can be enough for them to adopt the behavior. And then moving it into making it easier and easier to do, early adopters maybe see this is an interesting behavior I'm willing to do just because I'm interested in the behavior itself. And so the fact that I can do it relatively easy may be sufficient. But just having the infrastructure and it being easy to do isn't enough to get the mainstream to adopt these behaviors. Events like this are critical to start to expand the visibility into the early majority, those that are responsive to what is it that are the norms of how our community does its work. And if we don't see that others in our community are doing it, I may be reluctant to say, well, I don't want to, it seems like a risk to do something that isn't normative in my community. So a key part of these initiatives is the visibility aspect of not just making your postprint available, but also highlighting to others in the community that that is available. That hashtag plays a significant role in starting to shift the norms of the community toward adoption. And then to the extent that you can point out and provide evidence for the mainstream about how this is actually in one's own career interest, not just because it's a good thing to do, it makes it easier to bring the rest of the mainstream along. And there will always be resistors, the laggards who are not an adoptive behavior because they've never done it before. And it's really only when things become required or so costly not to do them that the end adopts. So the various motivations that are occurring means that how we message and how we engage the community has to be responsive to where we are in the adoption process. And so because there are a number of early adopters like you that are motivated for these behaviors, the extent to which you provide that visibility to help start to change the norms will make a big impact on these kinds of open science behaviors getting adopted more broadly. I want to close with just a couple of examples of how it is that we can be ineffective in our promotion of open science practices and how we might think about improving our effectiveness in our advocacy for these issues. One of the issues to wrestle with is open science as a social identity versus open science as good practice. A lot of the early advocates for open science, many of us that are here, are motivated by open science as an identity. We might identify with our research field, we might identify with the institution that we are a part of, say that's part of me. And many of us that are in the sort of the vanguard of open science also identify with open science as an identity. I'm an open scientist. And that's great because it can provide a sense of community, of motivation, of sense of self. This is meaningful to me to try to advance these issues. But for the majority of researchers, open science is not and will not be an identity per se. Their identities, most researchers are identified primarily with the kind of work that they do and the local things that are in their environments, right? My particular laboratory, my department. There are a variety of different identities or reasons or basis for how it is and why it is researchers do their work. So part of the messaging and engagement can't be, you have to be an open scientist and make that part of your profile and put that in your Twitter bio and in order to be part of the process, because most researchers won't be motivated by that. Rather, the more effective messaging and engagement is to point out how it is that the open science behaviors themselves are good for their research practice. And because virtually every researcher wants to do a good job in their research, it'll be much more effective to engage them on how it is that these benefit practices, rather than having a criterion of this really should be part of your identity. That's just going to be true of a small minority of people who are really at the advocacy end of this. A second factor is appreciating that a lot of these open science practices take practice to start doing them well. And it can be daunting to start to change our behavior and how we do our research toward new practices, because it feels like, oh, what if I do it wrong? What if it goes badly? And a real effective change movement first gets people to start trying the behavior. Just give it a shot, get experience with it, right? Pre-registration is a perfect example. Pre-registration feels big when we haven't done it before, because it's a new kind of work, planning and then documenting what we're doing before we've done the research, posting that to a service. And it can feel like that seems so big that it is daunting to even start to try. If we can instead adopt a model of getting people engaged with the behavior in order to get experience with the behavior, just like learning to ride a bicycle first requires getting on it and trying out things that aren't probably going to work, but over time will turn into more effective use of that new technology. We will be more effective at engaging the community by adopting that model versus a model that is idealism. If you're going to pre-register, make sure you do all of these things. And if you haven't done all of these things, then you're a bad researcher because you didn't do all the things for that behavior. And of course, we want to promote people doing these behaviors well, but we first need to do them at all and accept and embrace that the practice of it will improve the effectiveness over time. And it can be a real challenge for the vanguard, the people that are the early adopters that are really motivated by these practices. It can be easy to feel judgmental of people who are starting these behaviors and aren't yet doing them as well as we are. Oh, we're so great at all of this. And start to say, oh, here's what's wrong with all of your practices. But that can be a real inhibition when it feels like a judgmental exercise to actually even enter the fray of some of these behaviors. And so to the extent that it can be welcoming, encouraging, and with a training mindset, we will be much more effective at bringing people along with these new behaviors. And that's highly related with the third point here, which is having open science as an all or none mindset versus an incremental mindset. A lot of people before they enter open science feel daunted by it because there are a variety of different behaviors, sharing preprints, sharing postprints, sharing data, open materials, pre-registration, open review. I can't do all of these things. I'm busy. I've got a lot of other things that I do. I'm not so sure about some of these being relevant for my practice. And so I need to, if I want to be effective, recognize that's asking too much to say that you are going to flip from the way you do research today to an entirely open science practice. I've been an open science advocate for 12 years. I don't do all of the open science behaviors to the extent that I would like to do them. I've adopted them incrementally over the course of my career. How is it that I can be a little bit more open today than I was yesterday? And if we continue to adopt that mindset of incrementalism, that wherever you're ready to start, share a preprint, share a postprint, pre-register a study, any place to start is better today than it was yesterday in terms of advancing transparency and openness of the work that we do. And so if we can, in our change strategy and our advocacy, embrace and promote that, we will be much more effective at bringing along people who are interested, but not yet to the stage of saying, I'm ready to do all of these things. There are others that might come up in the question and answer, but I want to close now so that we can have as much time to discuss a lot of these issues and the particulars of the Postprint pledge as Ali presented. So thanks very much again for the invitation to be part of this, and I'm delighted to be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for very nice and informative talk. It was amazing. Well, unfortunately, I do not have access to my Q&A box, but let me ask Mike to join us. Hello, Mike.
Hi, no worries. I think perhaps we can give the participants a couple of minutes for them to type their questions. And in the meantime, I see quite a number of panelists being present, actually. So anybody who has any comments or questions, please feel free to sort of unmute yourself, because as panelists, we can't really post to the Q&A box. Oh, actually, we do have a question right now. So perhaps I can read the questions. Okay. Yeah, so wonderful initiative. I'm very sympathetic to the Postprint pledge, but I wonder whether this does not target the symptoms rather than the cause. Would it not be better to pledge to publish open access only, or at least as much as you can, preferably in Diamond open access journals only, and stop launching new journals that are not Diamond OA journals?
So yeah, thank you for this question. Now, this idea is similar to the cost of knowledge model, where you take the action to actively avoid certain outlets. This might work for established researchers who are confident that they can survive in academia by avoiding certain venues. But if we think of junior researchers, they will be the ones at higher risk of being disadvantaged if we close some venues for them. So yes, I do agree that Diamond open access is the best thing ever. If we can reach that point at some point in the future, that would be perfect. For the time being, why not, if the law allows us to post the accepted versions of our papers online, then why not? Let's raise awareness. Many people don't know this. They think that you sign the copyright and that's it. You have no choice. But in fact, you do legally.
Just to build a little bit on what Ali was saying, this really is part of this mindset of incrementalism. That we can identify a whole different world order of how it is that scholarship is conducted and the business models supporting scholarship. But to get from here to there is a long way. And if we don't appreciate the competing interests that individual researchers have, right? I need to get a job, I need to keep a job, I feel too much pressure to get into these journals or those journals. We may say we shouldn't have those motivations, but we do at present. And they exist in varying degrees across the community. And so if we rely on idealism purely, we will only bring along the idealists, many of which I suspect are here. So if we want to bring along everyone, we have to find solutions that we can build upon that can bring along as many people as possible. Thanks for that great question.
Yeah, we actually have another question just coming through. So what if you're interested in signing the pledge, but are unsure if you can track down all the postprint versions of your published work?
Yeah, this is an interesting question also. This is why we specifically mentioned future work. If you have the time to go back for your previous work and post the accepted versions also, that would be great. If you don't, at least from now on, once you receive the acceptance email from the journal, you go and publish or post the accepted version.
I'll just add that the first time I posted a postprint, I just decided I want to try this. So I went to a recent paper that I published and said, I'll just post this one. I found one, I'll post it. Once I did it, I was like, oh, wow, that was super easy to do it. Okay. And then I would go every day and post like 3 or 4 more of my old papers for the ones that I could find. And every time I did it, more people had access to my work than did before. Incrementalism.
Yeah, very well said. We actually have a question directed to Brian. So Brian, can you say a bit more about what the policy level on the theory of change model looks like? Are those policies at the level of learned societies, grant funding agencies, universities, or institutions? Thank you.
Yeah, excellent question. So there are perhaps 4 key stakeholder groups that can set policies that change research practice. Right? There are federal, national, state governments and agencies that drive policy at whatever level of control they have over some part of the research community. There are funders, those can be federal funders, but also private funders of research. There are journals and publishers of those journals that set policies for what it means to publish papers in their respective outlets. And there are institutions that hire staff and employees, researchers, and what the responsibilities are for doing their work. You also might identify societies, but usually they only have policy impact in terms of the journals that are associated with that society. Rarely does a society have policy impact over other practices. They're very important for norms, but not as much for policies. The key organizing principle that we promote for changing policies, I just put a link to the page in the chat, is called the TOP guidelines, Transparency and Openness Promotion Guidelines. And this is a policy framework for journals or funders or institutions to adopt to set the expectations for what they mean about open practices in their area of work, the grants that they fund, the papers they publish, the employees that work at their institution. And that has been broadly adopted. It's been endorsed by all of the major publishers, and we've made the most progress on the journal side of this. And now we work on trying to promote stronger adoption by more journals. We have about 1,400 journals so far that have adopted at least some part of that framework for the papers they publish. You can also look at topfactor.org. It's linked from that. I didn't put it as a link there, but topfactor.org documents what the policies are for different journals. And so one of the things that we're doing is systematically going through different areas of research practice and coding the journals on Top Factor for identifying which journals are promoting the strongest policies compared to others. So to the extent that you see any gaps there in your fields, feel free to reach out to us and we can collaborate on getting those journals coded so that there's more visibility for the progressive actors in the space. And we're doing now, moving to the same for funders, and then the horizon work will be on institutions to try to promote the same. So hopefully that gives a little bit of landscape, at least of how we think about the policy part, but feel free to follow up on that. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brian. We have another question. It's for Ali and Phil. I'm all in favor of the Postprint pledge. Might this be something to try to integrate into IRIS instead of using a new platform or repository?
Thank you, Luke, for this question. Excellent idea. If IRIS has this functionality to post PDFs, yeah, let's do it. You know, let's talk about it later and see if it is possible. If yes, we will add the instructions to the Free Our Knowledge website where people can read it and follow it. Yeah, thank you.
I think that's currently all the questions we have. And yeah, there's just a comment. I think everyone can see the comments in the chat as well. So Emma has also said Let's Talk, please post the announcement about new postprints to the Iris Facebook. Yeah, so already a lot of sort of action plans being formed. Yeah, I think we still have a sort of a couple of minutes, and I would really encourage people to sort of share thoughts, not necessarily questions. But of course, if you have questions, please raise them.
I wanted to just add something to piggyback off the ideas Brian was sharing. There are quite a few journals in our field now that have signed on to the top factor guidelines, and some of them are performing quite well, quite highly ranked there. And so obviously we realize that there are institutional or systemic ways that the field can incentivize open science. We're not naive to the fact that the Postprint pledge is an individual solution to some of the lack of access issues that are around. But at the same time, there has to be a kind of concerted effort. So although this is an individual response to kind of systemic issues, it will really help buy-in further down the line when there are institutional changes, if individuals are already enacting these practices, as Brian says, incrementally, so that there's this kind of confluence of factors at the individual level, systemic changes, institutional changes, which are really going to help really push it into the mainstream.
Oh, we actually have another question. Do you know if it's possible or appropriate to include a link to the postprint in the journal's abstract of the formatted publisher version? I've seen this with pre-registration, for example. It would be interesting to try this out.
This is a very, very interesting idea. And I think here the ball is in the editor's court. If they can lobby the publishers and convince them to do this, that would be great. Yeah, definitely great.
It's also possible on the services that Ali mentioned to link back directly to the published version from the preprint or postprint version. So just to show you real quickly, I can put on my screen. Let's see. Here is an example of the paper on SciArchive, and you can see on the right side the DOI of the preprint that was posted here, that if you wanted to cite that directly for some reason. And then you can add, once it's published in print, the peer-reviewed publication DOI right there. And then just clicking on it takes you to the published version if that, for some reason, the person wants. So there's a lot of ways to link these together to both ensure people can discover the pieces that they are trying to discover and to get the credit in terms of citation and everything else that one wants. I'll also note that Google Scholar, at least, is already pretty good at linking up citations that accumulated on preprints with the ones that have accumulated on the published versions. And other services are getting better at this. Crossref, one of the tools that manages a lot of metadata behind the scenes, is doing more and more to link up preprints and published versions so that they all of the citations and other information accumulate to both.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I think we're about to sort of reaching the end of the session, but of course, this is sort of the conversation can still go on. So if anybody still has any questions, or they think of other ideas or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to the speakers. I'm sure they're happy to sort of discuss further with you. Of course, I'll hand back to Maddie to wrap up the session. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Ali. That was very, very productive and informative session. I really enjoyed it myself. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for being in this session.